That you are live. All right, we are live. Welcome everybody to Gun 7. Today's live, we're going to be discussing the importance of voting. We've got some amazing guests here, amazing guests who are going to talk with us about the importance of voting, the kind of policies that they stand for. They're going to introduce themselves, and I'm really excited for this conversation. Again, welcome. Share with your, like-minded friends or all of your friends who would like to know more about voting and how they can, exercise their civic duty. I would like to welcome Judge Terri Jamison, Cheryl Munson, and Magistrate Lachelle Stroud. Thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate you all for being here. Could we start with introduction? So just Jameson, if you could start, and then we'll just go around the circle.
Okay. Thank you, Ifra, so much for the invitation to be here with you and discuss the importance of voting. I am Judge Terri Jamison. I'm currently a judge on the Domestic Relations and Juvenile Court, but I am a candidate for the 10th District Court of Appeals. I have been a judge now. I'm completing my 8th year. I've been elected twice by the voters of Franklin County because they understand that I am part of the community and that I have their best interest in heart in making sure that you have fair and impartial rulings when you come to the court. I also bring to the court 16 years of business ownership experience. I owned and operated an insurance agency, which was full service and selling multiple lines of insurance prior to going to law school. And then I went to law school and I worked for a brief time with the Franklin County Public Defender's Office in the municipal division, but I was a law clerk in the Common Pleas Felony Unit for about 2.5 years. I developed several skills there as I learned how to interact and support and represent indigent or defendants that could not afford to pay for their own lawyer. I went into my own practice in 2005, and I was in practice from 2005 to 2012 when I was successfully elected to my first term. I represented individuals in domestic, juvenile, criminal, and probate matters. I have been around the state representing individuals in multiple counties, and I would love to take my experience to the 10th District Court of Appeals and be there for you as you come before the court. The appellate court is different than a trial court because it reviews decisions that trial courts make. The appeals court will review any appeal that is made from a criminal trial, a domestic, a juvenile, a probate, municipal court, and even some administrative agencies such as workers' compensation. It also handles appeals solely in the 10th District here in Franklin County for claims where you have filed for victim of crime compensation and you were denied or didn't agree with the amount that you were given, you can file an appeal. It also covers appeals for the Court of Claims, and the Court of Claims handles any lawsuits that are filed against the state of Ohio. So if you lose or do not like the judgment that you get in the Court of Claims, you can file only in the Court of Appeals here in Franklin County. They also are the only appellate court that handles workers' compensation claims. So if you're injured on your job, denied workers' compensation, you can appeal it to the 10th District here in Franklin County. So those are just a few things that I would like to tell you about the Court of Appeals and tell you about myself. And vote Jamison, vote for justice. Thank you, Ifra.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Judge Jamison. Cheryl Munson.
Hi. So again, thank you very much for having me this evening. I appreciate being included. My name is Cheryl Munson. I am running for the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas General Division. So I went to undergraduate school at Ohio State. I went to law school at Ohio State. And in my third year of law school, I had a mentor who I talked a lot about, what I wanted to do with my law degree. And, one of my big, my goal was really to stand with people, when no one else was standing with them, to have someone beside them on the worst time and moment of their life. And so he said, I think you belong at the public defender's office. So I went there. I was a law clerk there. I was then an attorney in the municipal unit for 5 years. And now for almost 22 years, I apologize, that's my parrot in the background. For 22 years, I have been in common pleas. And so I do, as Judge Jamison told you, what the public defender does is represents people who can't afford their own attorneys. And so I do felony work in that regard. So I do low-level felonies. I do, aggravated murder trials. I do, I'm death penalty certified, second chair. So very, very serious work. And the work is critical in that, of course, we're defending their people's constitutional rights. But at the same time, we're representing marginalized people, underserved people from underserved communities. So you're really trying to bring them up to the same place where everybody else starts, right? Because they're lacking childcare, transportation, access to alcohol and drug treatment, mental health treatment. So it's really a wraparound, the whole person in terms of support and guidance, and of course, then defending them. And there are currently no former public defenders on the Court of Common Pleas, which to me is a big void. We have former prosecutors, civil attorneys, private attorneys, but no public defenders. And in my mind, again, that's a void. I think that's a lack of diversity of perspective, perspective that I can bring to the bench. I'm a firm believer that social justice and criminal justice are, not only compatible, but without social justice, you really can't have justice in the courthouse. And so that's why I'm running for the Court of Common Pleas. And again, my name's Cheryl Munson, and thank you for allowing me to introduce myself.
Thank you very much and welcome. Very glad to have you. Magistrate Lachelle Strout. Can you? I can't hear. Can you guys hear?
No. Okay. She's on mute now.
When she there.
No.
We can't hear you.
I'm sorry.
You got a bad connection.
Okay. No, we still can't. Oh, wait. No. I'm really sorry. Maybe disconnect and then come back and see if it works.
And make sure you authorize, there's a button to authorize the use of your microphone and your video when you first log in.
She did that. She's just got a bad connection. Okay, Ifra.
All right, if you can just come back, really love to have you, and then we can start with your introductions as well. With some questions for both Judge Jamison and Cheryl. One of the questions that, one of the things that I've heard you talk about the last time that I heard you speak was that people weren't really familiar or well-versed in like the judicial process, and that it's really important that they learn about it. What are some key components that you think people should know just as a basic understanding, and how can people learn more about it? Where do they start?
I think that, yes, I think the process is daunting to someone that's never been through it. Until I actually went to law school and got an internship, I didn't really understand the process. most lawsuits start with you receiving a complaint or some type of a summons or an indictment for a felony, but they have a starting point. In a civil action, it's a complaint that names maybe you're being sued, maybe you're being evicted, and it'll tell you what it is. In a criminal complaint, it tells you what you're charged with. If you get a felony indictment, then you'll get an indictment telling you what you're charged with. It's really critical that once you receive that, if there's a court date on it, that you don't miss court. Okay. Because if you miss court, you could, in a civil case, have a judgment rendered against you that you have to pay. You could be evicted. You could have your car repossessed. You could have your wages garnished. In a criminal case, if you miss court, they're going to issue a warrant or a capias for you to bring you to court because you failed to appear. So it's really critical that if you ever receive legal documents, that you do not ignore them. That's critical.
Absolutely. You do not ignore them. Otherwise, there are some consequences for it that could be prevented if you did not ignore it.
Absolutely.
So really
and Cheryl can talk about how even if you miss and you get a warrant, Cheryl can tell you what the process is to have that dealt with.
You can now, the public defender's office, even though we generally get appointed at arraignment, if somebody doesn't have an attorney and they have a warrant or a capias, you contact the public defender's office, and we have attorneys, that are on duty for that day to make arrangements to get you back in front of the judge. Now, sometimes we can't get them set aside, but I'd say 80% of the time we can. And here's another thing that the state does: if you if you signed a recog bond to get out of jail, that is a recognizance bond, your own signature, and then somehow you don't change your address or you miss a court date, not only do you get a capias, they indict you on a new felony called failure to appear on a recognizance bond, which itself is punishable up to 18 months in prison. And then what they're going to often do is use that as a mechanism sort of to get you to plead guilty to the other charge, right? If you plead guilty to the first charge, maybe we won't charge you with this failure to appear. And then, of course, once you're in jail, no one wants to be in jail. So then you're compromising and you're making deals that maybe you're not super comfortable with because you just don't want to remain incarcerated. So the best place to be is out of jail if possible. And as Judge Jamison said, you just really have to stay on top of it. And if you have any questions, always call the public defender's office, because we give advice to everyone, whether we're representing them or not at the time.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that breakdown and, for that reminder of importance.
And for the other place that you can get information is from your county clerk of courts. If you go to the clerk of courts, they can tell you if you have a court date. And so can the municipal clerk of courts. Now, in the juvenile court, because juvenile cases are confidential, you have to be the parent. You need to show an ID so that you can get information about whether or not a child is supposed to appear in court. And domestic is also open to the public, so you can get those records. But it's really important that you stay on top of your court dates, because once you receive what we call service, or you've received that summons, if you fail to come back at the court date and you have not made a connection to the court to request a continuance, the consequences is the action can either go forward or a warrant can be issued.
And Judge Jamison, what this makes me think about, I'm like, this is already difficult for, your regular person who has life struggles and, is going to work, has kids, has family. And then I think about how the issue is compounded when there's a language barrier for like new Americans and immigrants. So I wonder about, the kind of services that is offered, in a judicial process to prevent those consequences from happening to new immigrants due to a language barrier or
Well,
understanding?
we are required to provide an interpreter.
Okay.
So and if you're coming to the court, we would suggest that you bring someone with you
Mhm.
that can interpret for you to get a court date.
Okay.
Then you need to go to the courtroom and you need to request an interpreter. And an interpreter can be provided for you. Now, we do have some languages that are very difficult for us to get. So we
Mhm.
have to go to a language line where we have a contract where we can call on a language line and have someone interpret for you. But
Okay.
there are some languages here that are we just don't have certified interpreters for. So
Mhm.
if you bring someone with you, and I had to use someone that was not certified, and I just swore her in and asked her if she would provide an accurate interpretation from English. I think it was to Farsi, and Farsi back to English, so that that person has someone with them to help them to negotiate the process,
Mhm.
because it's difficult enough for someone that speaks English than to have a language barrier and not have someone with you to interpret. And just because it's interpreted doesn't mean it's understood.
Right, right, that too. So there's just so many layers upon layers of where something can get lost in translation and something can go wrong. And then a person receives those consequences as though they did that on purpose and missed the court date or they didn't do what was required of them. So, and that's like a huge, concern for me, especially because I'm from an immigrant community. So naturally, I'm thinking about my immigrant community, other immigrant communities. I'm like, how are they being served in terms of really providing the correct services so that they're able to get what they need and not receive consequences for something they didn't know. I see that we have Michelle back. Are you get okay? I'm so glad that you're here. All right. So before we move on to more questioning, if we could just have you, Lachelle Stroud, introduce yourself, tell us a little about your background. Really glad that you're here.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm so glad to be here with you this evening. So my name is Lachelle Stroud. I am currently a candidate for the newly created seat in the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas, Domestic Relations and Juvenile Branch.
Mhm.
Uh, Currently, I serve as the lead magistrate in the juvenile division of our court. I was appointed to the bench 7 years ago to serve. So every single day, I have the awesome privilege to be able to make decisions determining whether children have been abused or neglected, and if so, if they should be removed from their home and given to a relative or to children's services, and then what the parents need to do to get the child back into their home. I also
Mhm.
handle delinquency cases, which would be like criminal cases if the child were 18 instead of under 18 years of age, and determining what the sanctions or orders should be for types of cases
Mhm.
rather. I also handle, I'm one of two magistrates that preside over our empowerment docket, which is our dedicated docket for youth who are the victims of human trafficking, to make sure that they have the necessary resources and support to flee that lifestyle. I am from Columbus, Ohio. I have wanted to be a lawyer since I was 5 years old. It is the thing that I ever wanted to do outside of when I got to high school, and a local judge in domestic relations and juvenile court came to our high school to speak. And it was at that point, after seeing her and hearing what she did, that I expanded my goals to one day want to be a part of the judiciary. I graduated from The Ohio State University 17 years ago. Throughout my time of practicing, I have worked in every of our court.
Yeah.
I've represented parents and children in domestic relations matters as well as juvenile matters. I've also served as a guardian at litem cases to be able to give children a voice in the court without entering the trial actually coming into the courtroom. I've handled jury trials, bench trials, argued before the Court of Appeal and the Ohio Supreme Court. So I would love to take my experience to the bench as a judge, and all of everything that I've done, my entire body of work, I strongly believe has led me to this point. So I am working hard so that all of Franklin County can stand proud with Stroud and vote me to be judge in the newly created seat in our court. So thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you very much. And just a quick side question. Is there a difference between a magistrate and a judge? And what is it?
Yes, so magistrates are appointed to the bench and judges are elected. There are some states where magistrates are elected as well, but here in Ohio, that's the main difference, that magistrates are appointed. So for instance, in our court, we have so many cases. We're one of the biggest courts in this state, and the caseloads of our judges were so high that the legislature added these 2 new seats. So the decisions of magistrates have to be adopted by our judges. So that's the main difference between a magistrate and a judge.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. All right. So a lot of times when we focus on elections, we're focusing on like the big, I guess, national elections. And the focus from what I've been hearing from previous conversation is that we should focus more on local elections. Why is it more important for our individual lives for us to focus on the local elections? Not that the presidential and the other ones aren't important, but why are these more important directly to our lives?
Your local elections will impact you directly. As when I tell people just how important judges are, you're more likely to be in front of a judge than any other elected office. Not often do we go to the state house and stand on the floor to hear the representatives or to hear our state senators make decisions. But if you get a summons for a traffic ticket, if you get a summons for a child support, if you get a felony indictment, you get an eviction, a foreclosure, whatever, adoption, guardianship, most of those things are going to put you either in front of a magistrate to begin with or in front of a judicial officer. So I just say in front of a judicial officer. And the other reason is because the people in the state house are the ones that are making laws that directly impact you. State officials, because there is a division of power between federal government and state government. So in that division of power, your state elected officials will make laws that directly impact you. So it's really key for you to know who represents your district. It's key to know who you'll be standing in front of to make decisions. And it's key in knowing who has the power to release funds, to write executive orders, to make decisions. Your Secretary of State controls elections. So it's really important for you to know your state elected officials.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that breakdown. Anybody want to add a little bit more to that? Or
I just want to point, it's interesting because we really try to get people to vote all the way down the ballot. And I've actually heard some people recently suggesting that you should start at the bottom and vote up so that you're making sure that you're looking at every issue and at every race. Because in judicial races, traditionally, there's about a 25%
30%.
drop off, essentially 30%. Okay. People just get there and they don't know their judges and they just don't vote. Another issue is that although we're endorsed by a party, for instance, Judge Jamison, Magistrate Stroud, and I are all the endorsed Democrats in our races, you won't see a D or an R next to our name on the ballot. So if that's important to you, there is a judicial slate card that you can get online at the Franklin County Democratic Party website, as long with a sample ballot, just so you know that, I mean, you're voting for people who have been endorsed by perhaps, someone you think your values are more aligned with. And again, we're technically nonpartisan, but we are endorsed. And so I know the three of us are all proud to be Democrats, so we want people to know that. But in any case, again, just all the races, down ballot, up ballot, but just pay attention to your judges, because as Judge Jamison told you, you're far more likely to see one of us, should we be elected or they're already on benches, than you are to see the president or somebody at the top of the ballot.
And because this is a nonpartisan event, if someone does want to vote Republican, they can go to the Republicans' website and find out who they've endorsed. So we have to be aware that this is a nonpartisan event.
I apologize.
It is okay. So, thank you.
Yeah, but I just want to make sure that people know now, and there is no third party in the race here in Franklin County this time.
Yeah.
We have occasionally had third parties in the race, but there is none this time. So you do only have two endorsed opponents in each race at this time. So if you want to know both sides, you can go to Franklin County Democratic Party's website. You can go to the Republican Party's website, and you can find out who their endorsed candidates are.
Absolutely. And thank you for saying that. I appreciate that a lot. We hear all the time that voting is so important, yet we still don't have people that vote. Is there like barriers to voting, and how are we able to remove these barriers to make it easier, the word, more possible for people to vote? Or is there either is there barriers, or is there lack of faith or confidence in the system?
I think apathy has a lot to do with people not voting. And then there are people that are one issue voters. They're only interested in one race, and that could be the presidential race. So they would just skip the rest of the ballot. There has been incidents that have caused people to lose confidence in elections. One thing that causes people to lose confidence in elections is lack of diversity, not seeing anyone that looks like them or is from their culture or represents their values, or they're not sure if they represent their values. So it's incumbent upon us, with all of this Google, if all of these Facebook, Instagram, all of the media ways that we have access, to look up our candidates and see if they align with us. But lack of confidence, and I just think that's impacting a lot of people. Then some people believe that they cannot vote because they have been convicted of a felony. Ohio is not a state that precludes you from voting because you have a felony.
That's true. And that's a conversation I have with my clients a lot. The only time you're unable to vote is if you are serving the sentence on a felony. So if you're being held or serving a misdemeanor sentence, you can vote. If you're pre-trial in jail on a felony but have not been convicted of that felony, you can vote absentee. But the one thing to remember is if you do serve the felony sentence, when you get out, you have to re-register. You can vote, but you have to re-register with the Board of Elections to renew your opportunity to vote. So that's important too.
Good stuff. Thank you very much. One of the questions that we have here is that why is it so difficult for minorities to participate and vote in local and national elections? So why is it difficult for minorities to participate? So in terms of
Magistrate Stroud again,
I believe she's still here. I see her.
I don't know if she can speak to us or not.
We can't hear you again. We might have. So the question:
why is it difficult for minorities to vote? Was that the question?
Yes. Why is it difficult for minorities or new immigrants to participate in voting?
One of the reasons that I've discovered is minorities might not have the appropriate documentation. Think about this. If you are a person that resides with your mother, don't have a utility bill in your name, don't have a bank account, might not have a state ID, might not have a driver's license. Those are all things that you can vote with. A passport you cannot use for identification to vote. And some new citizens might have a passport, but might not have a driver's license. So there are barriers. There's barriers to getting your documentation if you don't have the money to go out and get a driver's license or a state ID. If you don't have transportation to your polling place, if you believe that there's no one on the ballot to represent you, you may not want to go. There are just so many barriers. If your signature doesn't match, there's just so many things that come up. Our history here, Black and brown people have been disenfranchised because they couldn't count the number of beans in a jar. They couldn't pay the poll tax. They couldn't do the reading test, or there were just so many different things that stood in front of minorities and even women. We did not get the right to vote until the 1920s because they thought women were too sensitive for these things. And they didn't want women on the juries because we were too sensitive and we needed to be shielded and protected from the everyday business of life. So there have been a number of reasons that people have been disenfranchised.
Mm-hmm.
And just a real quick note, something we recently noticed is on absentee ballot applications, it doesn't designate when you're filling in your birthday that it should be month, date, year, but that's the only way they're accepting it. So some people who are not originally from the United States are going to write their date in a different order. And so but it's not specified. So it has to be, month, date, and year, demanding it be done the way that, we do it in the United States without any leeway for people from other cultures and countries, unfortunately. And so, but they're not telling them that on the form. So they've got to be very careful about that or it will be rejected.
And the other thing that's interesting about the absentee ballot, I don't know if you looked at it, but the request, it has the primary on there, it has special election on there, and it has general election. Well, the only election that is necessary for you to check the box is the general election. So it gets confusing to someone that does not understand that the primary has already happened, the special election has already happened, and you only need to check the box for the November 3rd general election.
And one begs the question, why did they include it in there still? Or did they just all print out the same papers at the same time or create the same document at one time for the entire year? Kind of problematic.
The same document for the entire year.
Yes. One thing that I was thinking of, and I think I mentioned it last time as well, given, this country's like racial history, a lot of people back to, the apathy and just dissatisfaction with the system, do not believe in the American criminal justice system and do not want to, partake in it at all because they believe that they will be participating in their own disenfranchisement. So how can we, combat that and have people buy into the system again? So what kind of what do you represent that's going to be different, right? Because judges, like you said, hold a lot of power. People are more likely to stand in front of a judge. A lot of African-American people have stood in front of judges. A lot of African-American people are jailed. A lot of immigrant community members fall under the cracks in the criminal justice system. So why should people still partake in this and participate in a system that continues to disenfranchise them?
Well, I can say that, that's personally one of the reasons that has motivated me to run for judge, because as a public defender, that's what I've spent my entire legal career doing, is trying to, even the scales for people of color and people from low income areas and people's voices that are just not being heard, which is, again, why I say that it's a void in my mind that we have no former public defenders on the bench. And so many of our judges are coming out of the prosecutor's office. And so it's easy to sit on the bench and say, and always take, for instance, you have a motion hearing and a police officer takes the stand and testifies that he or she somehow saw, the joke we have that, from a mile away that your client had something that looked like a gun in his pocket, and that's not reasonable. But people coming from, the prosecutor's office or other areas, maybe they don't interact so often with clients who I know that the police officers often or sometimes say things that are not accurate to create a scenario where they can search somebody. And I think my experience, if I'm on the bench and that's happening, certainly if an officer, is credible, an officer is credible. I mean, there are good police officers, they make good stops, they do good work, but there are occasions when they're not credible. And my experience as a defense attorney has been that judges won't call them out on that. They're almost always deferring to what the officer says, even when it doesn't make sense. To me, that's an issue. That's just one small, example that I'm bringing. But what I'm hoping to do is join a bench with, a more progressive and realistic and equal outlook so people can regain some faith in the criminal justice system. And then, of course, Judge Jamison's going to be doing that at a higher level.
Magistrate Stroud, are you there?
I would say is, yes. Okay, so what I was going to say is I agree with you that in some communities there is a lack of trust in the criminal justice system. But what I do when I go out into the community is to encourage everyone to become involved in the criminal justice system. Because if we sit back and decide not to be engaged and fully involved in the system, then we cannot expect that there can be changes. So we need representation at every single level for all of us to become engaged, for us to see the changes that we are hoping for. So I go into schools so their age, inspiring the youth in our community to become involved in the system. That they know who the key players are in the criminal justice system, as well as in the courtroom. So I go into schools, I talk to them about the criminal justice system, about the judicial system specifically, make sure they know, who the prosecutors are, who the defense attorneys are, and what they do. And then we reenact court cases. I think it's important, especially for our youth, to see themselves as a part of the system, so that we can all work together and make a difference. Because if we sit back on the sidelines, we'll just continue to see this lack of trust, and we won't see change. To whatever areas of passion, because I strongly believe in collaboration. So if we all work together in excellence, then we really can attack the issues from the inside out, as opposed to sitting on the sideline without becoming involved.
Another thing that I think gives the community some confidence is having a diverse judiciary. And I don't mean just diverse ethnically, but people with diverse backgrounds, diverse experience. Since I've been on the court I came on the court in 2013. The first thing that I noticed in our court were the numbers of African-American males that were coming before the court because they owed child support. But they had numerous barriers: no driver's license, no employment, no housing, no hope in a lot of areas. And they just seemed like they were cycling through. So seeing that over and over, I said, there has to be something else we can do. So I reached out to the executive director at Child Support, and we started a program called Compass, and it's to direct you to success. So we hired a success coach to help men and women that are unemployed to first do a small assessment to see what the barriers are, and then to link you with community providers that could help you to remove those barriers. So it's I can't say it's 100% successful, but we have about 40% success rate because we continue to work with you until you get that job, until you build your self-esteem, while you're getting certifications to become employed, while we're getting your driver's license back for you, while, you know, as long as you're compliant, going to your classes, doing what you have to do, we can remove that suspension off the license for child support. Then we brought in the BMV, and they're able to talk to them about amnesty programs to help get rid of fees that are affecting their driver's license. So that's just a small piece of how judges can impact by bringing change. And having come from a social work background, my first job that I ever had in life was in social work. So seeing those kind of things implemented, it just helps to bring a new perspective to it. So a lack of diversity, having the same modes of people, homogenous mindsets, you get homogenous results. But when you bring in some diversity, you can increase the confidence that the public has in the judiciary. And that's critical. You have to believe that the person you're standing in front of hears you, respects you, and will rule fairly in the situation.
Absolutely, and just sees you as a human being
Correct.
who's made a mistake and is still worthy of, you know, respect and dignity and love and all of that. And there's much really that I have to say about what I think about, you know, currently the judiciary system and how easily disposable people are, and just the barriers that they have when they come out of the system that, you know, make it more conducive for them to go back into the system, and round we go. So that's one of the things then that leads to that lack of trust that people have. A couple of you have spoken on like the kind of work that you do in the community in terms of representation. How do you encourage more representation, or encourage youth of color in particular, that they can be a part of this problem solving, that they can be part of the system, not in the way that it negatively, adversely impacts them, but they can be part of solving our society's problems?
Well, one thing that I do is I partner with the downtown high school. They have a criminal justice program at the downtown high school, and I bring those young people to the court, and we talk about paths in criminal justice. Do you want to be a probation officer? Do you want to be a lawyer? Do you want to be a police officer? Do you want to be a fireman, an EMT? So that's critical. The other thing I do is Capital University Law School has a summer program where they bring high school students in for leadership development. I always impart in that program. I'm also an adjunct at Capital Law School, where I help to encourage students to apply to go to law school. And even if I tell them, even if your scores are not what you think they should be, apply anyway, because diversity matters. And we want to see you get in. If you get in, we'll help mentor you through. My scores for the LSAT weren't what I thought they should have been, but I was still able to get into law school, went through law school, worked my way through worked my way through law school, and was able to pass the bar the first time. So if you have a mentor or someone that's willing to help you, don't give up your dream of being a lawyer. Anyone can do this. It's a different type of learning. It's a different type of environment, but the impact that you can bring to your community, if you go, I'm the first lawyer in my family. I can't say I'm the first college graduate, but I'm the first lawyer in my family. But now I have a niece that's a lawyer. Now I have a cousin that's a lawyer. So they have to see the model. The model is important.
I really like that you said that the model is important. You can't be what you can't see.
Absolutely.
Anybody else want to chime in on the ways that they try to increase like representation in the judiciary system for people of color, for more women to participate in the judicial system, in the problem-solving aspect rather than the other side of the aisle?
Can we hear Lachelle? Because Lachelle has a wonderful story about how she first decided that she wanted to be a lawyer. If she can, I don't know if we can hear
Lachelle,
her.
are you there? I think I just heard myself.
Yes. So I strongly agree with what Jamison said. That it's important to have someone to model. So I know one of the things that I do when youth who come into my courtroom, I engage them in the dialogue as far as what my orders will be. So I think it's important for the people who come before you to know that you care about what their thoughts are, about what they believe that their needs are, and fully engage them in the conversation. Because at the end of the day, it's their lives. So they have a say in what happens in their lives. I think it's important when people come into the court system, especially juveniles, not to harp so much on, what did you do? But for the question is, how did you get here? So that if we figure out how you got here and what led you to the courtroom, then we can figure out how to keep you out of court for the future. So I think that engagement piece is critical when you're talking to members of the community and the people who come in front of you in the courtroom. So making sure that you have a judge or magistrate who is cognizant of that and is willing to listen to everyone who comes into that courtroom, because people really can tell the difference when you genuinely care about them. So I think it's going out into the community, sharing at any opportunity that you have, again, so that people know that they can see themselves at every step within the system, as well as fully engaging everyone who comes into your courtroom, them have a voice in what happens and what decisions are made.
You mentioned women. About 50% of the law students are women.
Yeah.
But when it comes to running for office, they say you have to ask a woman 5 or 6 times before she'll do it. But if you ask a man the first time, he thinks he's able to do it. I kind of don't fall into that mode, because I think my father was very passionate that we would know that we had value and what we had to say had value. So I kind of feel like women should not sit back and wait for someone to give you permission. It's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. So I think that we need to be more assertive as women. When I look at someone like Cheryl that's got 26 years of experience, I don't know why she waited so long to run, but I know she's done death penalty cases. I know that she's represented clients at every felony level and even in municipal court. And so when you look at someone with her experience and you say, wonder why she waited so long. But, it just, we don't have as much confidence in ourselves as others have in us. And when you look at what you do as a lawyer and you're sitting with someone that's on trial for a death penalty case, they've got more confidence in you as their lawyer sometimes than you have in yourself. So women we have to boost each other up. We have to encourage each other that you can do this. Running for political office is a year-long journey. We started months ago. We started before the petitions were ever filed in December. And it is now the first day of October. We've been running for a year already. So it takes some stamina. It takes encouraging each other. It takes, those reality checks of, why are you doing this? Are you doing it because you really want to be out there? You're giving yourself that reality check. Why am I out here? And so being in politics is not for the faint of heart. being running an election is not for the faint of heart. It takes some stamina, and you got to encourage yourself as you go through it. So, every time I get a chance, I bring another woman along with me. Women have not learned that. They will go and do things on their own, but they don't always bring somebody else with them. You need to learn how to bring others with you. If you want to see more people that look like you, whether that's woman, whether that's minority, whatever position you want to see, you have to bring somebody else with you.
A message, okay? Mic drop there, but I continue. Because that is a message. Because I remember I reached out to you and you had suggested to bring Magistrate Lachelle Stroud and Miss Cheryl Munson. And I was like, yes, bring them. But you had suggested that. And I was very excited that you did. So I'm really glad that you said that.
She's walking the walk that she's talking.
Absolutely, right? She does more than just talk the talk, walking the walk. That's really important. I was looking at the comments and seeing if there are any questions because we're nearing that hour and I didn't want to take up all of your time and everybody else's time. Yeah. One question. What's that?
You know what? I love my community. So anytime I can get in front of my community to help them understand processes, help them understand, part of being a solution is telling people where they can get the information. Absolutely. Like in our court at 373 South High Street, on the 4th floor, we have a self-represented resource center. You can go there. We have a contract with Capital University Law School. Mm-hmm. We have 2 attorneys there and 2 interns that can help you get to the right forms, get to the right place to file the forms. Sometimes just having the information is critical.
It's half
you can get to the clerk's office. Find your way to the clerk's office. Right. Find your way here. Knowing which court you're supposed to be in for what actions, that's critical. So, and we're working on a domestic violence center where you won't have to go from court to court. You'll go to that center and be able to file the correct petition for your protection order. If it's domestic violence, you need to file in the Domestic Relations and Juvenile Court. And domestic violence is defined as violence between family members. So you can be a blood member, a mother, father, sister, brother, cousin. That's domestic violence. But then you might need a protection order because your neighbor is harassing you and menacing you. Then you want to go over to felony court. Well, in the near future, we're going to have a domestic violence center where you'll go to that one center and they'll be able to determine which petition you need to file and which judge you need to go before. So those are things that are critical to someone that's trying to get something done. Nothing is more deflating than to have completed all of the paperwork, sat there, waited, and you do have to wait sometime. Let me just say that. Sometimes you have to wait when you come to court. And they've waited, and they get in front of the judge and they say, well, that petition does not belong in this court.
That is so discouraging.
It is discouraging. And that might be the person that walks back out and goes back into a domestic violence relationship because they got to the wrong judge with the wrong type of petition.
And that could have its own dire consequences. So dire.
It can have dire consequences.
Very dire. Well, I'm really happy and excited to hear all of the good work that you're doing, all of you. How can the community members collaborate and partner with you on some of the ventures that you're doing?
Well, first of all, if they want to know more about us, obviously, we each have our websites.
Okay.
And mine is www.cherylmunsonforjudge.com. And so if you support us and put us on the bench, then of course, as we've all said, we are community minded, and not just, one community, the entire community, no matter who they are, what they look like, or how much money they have. That's who we're here for. So that's my website. And I know, Judge Jamison and Magistrate Stroud have theirs as well.
I've added your website on the comments. I don't know if you guys have access to the comments. If you do, you're welcome to at your website.
I guess we do have access.
One other person asked, why are there very few young American voters? So is there something that deters the younger voters more so than other people?
I think one thing that I can say about younger voters, they don't teach civics in school. Young people don't even know the branches of government. They don't know that there are three. So I think a lot of it is the loss of civic education. And I think that it's critical that it be put back in the school. If you don't know that the governor represents the executive branch, that the legislature and the Senate represent the legislative branch, and then judges represent the judicial branch, and why there are three separate branches to keep checks and balances on each other, you really don't understand why it's so important to vote. And then if you were not a part of the movement, that people actually died to register people to vote, not just to vote, but people, the freedom riders that came down to the South from the North on buses to go down to help register voters, and were murdered, and their bodies were buried, and some were never found. If you don't know the history of the struggle, it's difficult to get people to understand why it's so critical for them to vote.
That's powerful. We have this huge poster at home that my son had created, and it was after John Lewis died, rest his soul. But we were talking about, what it took for African-American people to be able to vote in this country, for women to be able to vote in this country, and all of the sacrifices that were made. So it's really important that, we know that, and we appreciate that, have that great appreciation for it, that it didn't come easy then.
And
go ahead, Cheryl.
I was just going to say,
I'm just trying to figure out how to put a comment in.
You just make the exact point that I was going to make, is that if you have a young person in your life, a child, a niece, a nephew, or just a child that you mentor, a child that you're helping, or a teenager, have those conversations. Just keep having them and having them. And if you have to sit down with the voter registration form and do it with them once they're approaching 18, or you have to do that. I mean, I have two teenage daughters who have heard nothing but, that I vote in every election. I participate in every election. I volunteer on campaigns, and now I'm running. And I don't think it would even cross their minds to miss an election. And so I just think we have to just keep pushing that message, just like you said, that you had that conversation in your home.
Absolutely. And we have this big poster that he made over the summer as a reminder on our wall. So.
Well, I can't find where to put in the comments. See, that's the difference between these young people. They've already put it in there, and this senior citizen.
If you just tell me, I'll put it in for you.
Okay. It's www.votejudgejamison, JAMISON.com.
Okay. So.
But it is critical that people know the history. And, we talked a little bit on another call about people that are one issue voters that say, well, I can't vote for so-and-so because they believe in abortion. I can't vote for so-and-so because they believe in same-sex marriage. If that is the only issue that you're voting on, remember that there is immigration, Remember that there is health care. Remember there's social security. Remember there's housing. Remember there's incentives for the impoverished or just the working poor. Remember all of these things are there. And because I'm older than most of you on the call, I remember when there were covenants and deed restrictions that didn't allow people of color to live in the same neighborhoods as Caucasians. I remember when you were only getting where people we've had affirmative action to help balance the number of African Americans, Hispanics, Asians in the workplace. So there were set asides for college admission. I remember all of those things, but there have been some recent decisions in the U.S. Supreme Court that have said that affirmative action is no longer necessary. So now there is no set aside for those education entrances. There is no set aside for those jobs. So there are no set asides for housing. And you still have some places where they haven't removed the deed restrictions and those things. So there are broader issues than who somebody decides to marry in their personal life. There are broader issues with whether or not a woman decides that she does not want to carry a child to term. And because women of color in Franklin County are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth. And our children are more likely to die before the age of 1. So are we pro-birth or pro-life? Because if we are pro-life, then we have to look at the entirety of whether or not we are giving good health care to minority communities and to the impoverished. Because we have to look at the entire picture. And your personal preferences cannot be viewed in the judiciary. We are not allowed to come in and rule based on our personal preferences. We have to rule based on the law. So when we look at these broader issues, we have to understand that there may be people that might have 1 or 2 things that we don't agree with, but they're fair, they're just, they're equitable to everybody. And who would be more fair than someone that has already been discriminated against? They understand it. They have empathy for it. They will, come up with programming. They'll be more directly understand the more direct impact that their decisions have on your life. So I think that those are some of the things that we need to talk about in our communities, that we don't just become one issue voters, but we look at whoever is president is going to choose the next person that's going to sit on the U.S. Supreme Court. And that person can have some major impact on your life. If it were not for the judiciary and some of the orders that they've made, think of some of the programs and the policies that would have gone through that were blocked by the judiciary. So we have to realize that there's more at stake this election than there's ever been in history, because what's happened, we've reverted back to a history and a time where there was a great racial divide. And it's going to take people that are socially conscious and that have an empathy for people to be on the bench, to be in legislature, to be in the Senate, to make decisions that are supportive of all people.
Oh my goodness. Mic drop. I was going to ask everybody to sum up or give us a quick synopsis of why people should vote for you. But I think Judge Jamison covered it, right? For herself. So maybe everybody else can give theirs.
I'll just say again, I've dedicated my legal career. The question, came, why have I not run before? I think because 2 reasons. One is that there are public defenders on the bench. And I think that goes to the point that you don't see somebody else from where you come from doing that. And so, suddenly
I'm
it's
the first,
like,
probably, right? Am I the first
Yeah.
public defender?
Well, in common pleas court, it was Lou Williams.
Oh,
Was it
okay.
Lou?
I remember Lou.
Yeah.
Okay. That was in general division.
Yeah, general. That's what I'm referring to. Yes, general division. So, I mean, and then it just occurs to you that you go in our office is doing 80% of the work, criminal work in that courthouse, and yet day after day we just wait the election out, and then somebody else takes the bench, and I'm like, well, why aren't we taking the bench? And so, I think it's time for that to happen, just because, again, people's voices are not being heard. My clients' voices are not often being heard. I mean, that's what we're there for, but you need a judge, a judiciary that is open to that. And it's all about equality for justice. I've dedicated myself to equal justice, and now I just want to bring that to the bench. So, I mean, it's just transferring the love I have for equality and what I'm doing to a larger audience.
That's amazing.
Well, Lachelle is coming back.
Yes.
Can I just say that if you have not received your absentee ballot request, you need to call the Franklin County Board of Elections at 614-525-3100. If you believe you are a registered voter and did not receive your absentee ballot request, call 614-525-3100 to request an absentee ballot application. Once you receive your application, you've turned your application in and you receive your ballot, you want to mark your selections, fill out your ID envelope, and return the ballot by the deadline. Now, at the Franklin County Board of Elections at 1700 Morse Road, there is a locked box that you can personally drop your ballot off if you don't trust putting it in a mailbox. For you to return it in person, you must turn it in by 7:30 p.m. on November 3rd. Early voting will start on October the 6th. If you have not registered, you must register by noon, October the 5th, because they close the Board of Elections at 2:00 on Monday, October the 5th, so that they can begin early voting on October the 6th. You can vote anytime between October the 6th and November the 3rd at 7:30 p.m. So your ballot must be dropped off at the Franklin County Board of Elections if you're taking it in person. If you're going to mail it, it must be postmarked by Monday, November the 2nd, and it has to be received within 10 days of November 3rd or no later than November the 13th. So those are just some critical things about getting your ballot in. And it is critical that you get it in. So you must register by October the 5th at noon. You must vote no later than November the 3rd at 7:30 p.m. Or you must postmark it by putting it in a mailbox, and it must be postmarked by Monday, November the 2nd, and received within 10 days of November the 3rd. Get your ballot in. Make your voice your vote.
Yes. And I wanted to give you Lachelle's website, that she can't be here. We've lost her picture again. So she is www, and then it's LachelleStroudforJudge.com.
All right.
I think she put it in.
I think Michelle put her in. Yeah, she did.
Yeah. Oh, she got it. Good. Okay.
I was trying to write everything Judge Jamison was saying, the dates, the address, etc. So last date to register by noon, October 5th. If you're going to mail it by November 2nd. Has to be received by within 10 days of November 3rd or the latest November 13th. So those are good dates to, and I'll try to put together like a little post, like a little card, physical card, but like a online card with like dates.
And definitely make sure that you vote all the way down the ballot. Look your candidates up. There's no excuse not to. Go all the way down the ballot. And there are 2 issues on the ballot as well. The Civilian Review Board is on the ballot. And what's the other issue, Cheryl?
The energy. We just discussed it.
I don't even know.
On
issues.
Yeah, you can go to the Board of Elections website, and it'll have a copy of the
issues.
Yeah,
that's okay. I will add it all. I'll get that information.
And last but not least, if you have moved since the last election, make sure that you change your address by October the 5th at noon so that you can vote without having to vote a provisional ballot. So the same card that you use to register is the same card you use to change your address. Put in your new address and put in your old address where you were last registered.
I just did that a few days ago.
Make sure you get it in. And
I get it in.
If you are registering people to vote, their registration has to be there by noon on Monday.
Okay. Absolutely. I'll talk to you more about that in a little bit, 1-to-1, or 1-to-2, but just when we're off. Somebody had a question. They said, if they said your ballot was accepted in September 30th and will be counted, is that good?
We haven't had a ballot yet.
No.
We've only had a ballot request.
Oh, okay.
The ballot won't get set out till October 6th, right, Judge?
I think they start mailing them I think they start Monday afternoon.
Okay.
I think.
So they have received ballot application, but the application just gets
the application to request.
Do you see that on the bottom?
We don't have ballots out yet.
What they've said is his ballot request was accepted. So now he should wait for the ballot.
The actual ballot.
The actual ballot should be coming in the mail. No ballots have been mailed out because you cannot start voting until 6:30. I think is it 6:30, 8 o'clock Tuesday morning. If you want to go up to the early voting center at 1700 Morse Road, you can actually vote up there. But if you requested a ballot, you have to wait for it to come to you in the mail.
Okay.
And they will not be mailed. They have not been mailed out yet. The only thing that was mailed out was the absentee ballot request form. And there is a ballot tracks that you can track to see whether or not your absentee ballot was received.
Now, his follow-up question is that it's
in Minnesota. No, we're only talking about Ohio.
Yeah,
we have.
They already be voting.
So they're already voting?
They could be, because some states have already started. I know they started in September in Michigan. So it depends on what state you're in on when absentee voting started.
All right. Okay, so so it's state specific. So we're only discussing Ohio because that's what we know. We're not 100% sure on the other states.
Absolutely, we are not.
There are too many of them, and we're focused on one for now. All right. Any other questions? We're at like 1 hour and 13 minutes. So thank you very much for your time. If you could just stay on for a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit after we end the broadcast. But I just wanted to tell everybody else. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for, sharing the broadcast and giving us your time. Most important thing here, most important takeaway is, okay, so there's one more question, and I'm not sure if this is, okay, so it says, your thoughts on Trump army or ballot watchers. Is that like a concern or something that people should be worried about?
Well, for someone to be a ballot watcher, you need so many candidates to actually sign for them to be able to be there. I don't know what state that's in, and I don't know if anyone has signed to be a ballot watcher. Now, in Ohio, our Chief Justice has requested that attorneys will be poll workers and election, what do you call them, Cheryl? Be there to answer questions to make
there's
sure.
There's poll workers and there's election officials or monitors or
election monitors to make sure that people are not being turned away. So I don't know exactly whether, and in some states, some candidates could have signed to have ballot watchers. But I've seen them before. What they do is they sit at the polls and they try to see whether or not people have proper ID, if they're being allowed to vote without proper ID, without correct information. So as long as in Ohio, you have a driver's license, a state issued ID, it cannot be issued from any other state. It must be issued from Ohio. It cannot be a passport. You can use a utility bill with your current address on it. Let's see, what other things can you use? A paycheck stub that has your information on it. So there are different things that you can use when you go to the polls. So if you have a doubt about whether or not you have proper ID, please look on Franklin County Board of Election website or the Ohio Secretary of State, or even the Secretary of State in whatever state you reside in should have all of your election rules on their website, what type of ID you need. So make sure that you have proper identification. Make sure that you are a registered voter, because there's a lot of emphasis on trying to catch fraud. We all know that it's like 0.00001% of fraud. It's non-existent, basically. But this is something that people are doing this year that you need to be aware of, and make sure that you have proper ID.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you, everybody who's watched the live broadcast. Appreciate you. Vote, definitely vote. Your voice, your vote. And I will see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ifra.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.